So, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker of the day, Reverend Kevin Fear, Health and Safety Strategy Lead of the CITB. With over 40 years industry experience, Kevin is a chartered civil engineer, a chartered member of the Institute of Highways and Transportation, and a chartered member of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. In recognition of his outstanding contribution to construction health and safety, Kevin was made an honorary fellow of APS, that's the Association of Project Safety, and in 2013 he chaired the Construction Industry Advisory Council Steering Group that produced industry guidance on the CDM regs. He's currently involved with a construction industry initiative, Building Mental Health, which aims to support construction companies to provide support and guidance on mental health and well-being to their employees and members of their supply chain. His keynote address today focuses on professional responsibility and construction ethics more than compliance. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Kevin Fear.
Well, good morning. It's really lovely to be here, and thank you to CABE for inviting me this morning. I have to confess that I am nervous about giving this presentation, and it's not that unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, because I do stand up most Sundays and speak in front of the public, but it's about the subject, and I find that it's really fascinating that CABE have asked me to speak about professional responsibility and construction ethics more than compliance, and this is a subject about which I haven't spoken before. And so I said, yes, thank you, David, I will do this keynote speech for you. But you hadn't told me that this was going to be a keynote speech after a keynote speech given by Dame Judith Hackett. And what sort of analogy can I give? It is like after the Lord Mayor's show, really. I mean, her talk was a really solid 3-course meal, and it is probably a bit of a light souffle. Anyway, what I have done is I've given this a lot of time and attention to think about what it is that's going on within CABE and what you might want to hear. Professional responsibility and construction ethics, more than compliance. So I've never given a keynote speech before, so I thought, what is a keynote speech all about? Well, it's not a leadership talk, and it's not a motivational talk, so I'm really sorry you're not going to be motivated by what I'm about to tell you. But what it is about is setting the tone for the day, and it's encouraging you to think differently. This is somebody you probably won't recognise. This is Bishop Tom Wright, and he has got the brain the size of a planet. He has written about 50 books on theology and ethics and all sorts of things. And in his book, which I'm reading at the moment, which is an autobiography of St. Paul, I was really encouraged to read this in the first chapter. The point of discourse is to learn with and from one another. I used to tell my students that at least 20% of what I was telling them was wrong, but I didn't know which 20% it was. Now, encouraged by that, I would say probably 50% of what I'm going to tell you is wrong. I don't know which 50% it is. But the flip side is, that means 50% might be true. And if 50% is true, then you need to think about what that means for you. Lord Lytton said yesterday, don't put your heart before your head. This morning, I'm asking you to do the other way around. Do put your heart before your head and start to engage with that deeper feelings. Already been introduced very ably, thank you. CITB Strategy Lead, Chair of the Construction Sharing Our Success Working Group, Chair of various different things. That's who I am. So what's the subject for the keynote? Professional responsibility and construction ethics more than compliance. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, that begs two questions. What is compliance? What do we mean by that? And then what might more than compliance look like? And it made me realise that actually I think this is in two categories. There's unconscious compliance and conscious compliance. You've all been given a program. And if this, you've been, thank you for turning up this morning, by the way. So you've been diligently looking at the program and deciding that you're going to turn up here at a certain time. There's compliance in what you're doing. Now, if this wasn't a one-day, two-day conference, if this was the start of a school year, quite quickly you wouldn't need this anymore because it'd be like the timetable. And quite quickly you would unconsciously be complying with where you're expected to be at a certain time. So I think largely compliance starts with us about thinking about something, and then it becomes habit, becomes what we do. That is how things are around here. So unconscious compliance, I started to look at things that we do. We just accept it. I mean, I would have loved this morning to have started this talk speaking in French. You would have been really surprised at that. So would I, because I don't speak French. You came here this morning, and some of you came in this morning, some of you came yesterday. You drove on the left-hand side. Nobody told you to come driving on the left-hand side. You just did that unconsciously. We accept a similar calendar and time system. You've all turned up on the right day and the right time. We've complied with a system that is driving our behaviours and what we do. These are variable social norms. I mean, we tend not to eat with our mouth open in public. Now, you don't think about that until you're opposite somebody at breakfast and they are eating with their mouth open in public, and you really appreciate that that is a social norm. We tend to be punctual for meetings. There is some variance with that if this is a social gathering. If you've been invited out to dinner, it's acceptable to be 5 or 10 minutes late to your host. We tend not to jump queues. That makes British people really uncomfortable when we go on holiday to places where they do jump queues. We tend, when we talk to somebody, to keep roughly arm's length from somebody. There's been a really fascinating, it's probably available on YouTube, of slow motion camera of some American Texans in a meeting with people from Japan. And people from Japan, because of their society, they're much closer, there's really more crowded. They're comfortable being quite closer to people. Texans aren't. And it's like a slow-motion dance. The Japanese people were following the Texans around the room as they were backing away because they wanted to keep more arm's length. We tend to say sorry when we bump into people. My wife and I this morning were going back to our room. Somebody came round the corner and said, "Oh, sorry." We just do that. That's part of our unconscious compliance. When we greet friends of the opposite sex, we tend to, nowadays, give them a kiss. Let's decide, Britain, are we going to give 1 or 2 kisses? Please, make your mind up. We tend to respect older people. There tends, I've found since I've been ordained, respect for priests. I'm sure that will slip after this talk. We tend to buy rounds for people in a pub. If you buy one for me, I'll buy one for you. We avoid extended eye contact. When we come across somebody who's staring intently into our eyes, it becomes really uncomfortable. We talk about the weather. When we're standing with somebody we don't know, that's a thing that British people just talk about because we do have an awful lot of weather. We don't complain in restaurants, but nowadays you can write a really stinking review on TripAdvisor. We tend to use a knife and fork. We tend not to tread on kittens or kick dogs. And we are shocked when we hear of people who are abusing animals in that way. No, there was a dress code for last night's dinner, but there wasn't a dress code for today. But most of you have kind of complied with a kind of dress code. And it's interesting, the position of ties nowadays. I was so grateful when I became ordained, and I don't have to decide what tie I'm going to choose today. Do I choose the slightly amusing one that my children bought me? Do I wear the serious one? So there's all these things going on that we've unconsciously complied with. We recognise science and technology. All of you in the design fraternity are using design codes. We don't doubt them. Have you yourself verified that that is how materials really behave? No, you haven't. We've depended on other people who have put together these codes, and we comply with them. And we will carry on complying with them until the code actually changes. You've got your own rules of professional conduct, competence, Only undertake professional tasks for which you're competent. Integrity, treating all fairly and with respect without bias. Responsibility, accepting responsibility for the work carried out under your supervision. To notify CABE if you're convicted of a criminal offence or have become bankrupt. Information, being prepared for continual professional development. That is partly why you're here, apart from listening to some really great speakers, except for myself. This is what you're doing. You're building up your professional knowledge and contacts. Compliance with contract law. Most of you have been just hearing other people talking. You're in contracts with other people. And we comply with contract law, and there's standard forms of contract which rule how those contracts will be managed. And we go to arbitration when things are wrong. We are complying with this process. And then there's compliance with statutes and regulations. This is a sort of thing that you do if you're employing other people. This is where I started to think these philosophical questions that are going on. Do we only really comply with this sort of thing when there's a chance that we might get caught out? I mean, when you go home after this event, driving on the motorway, will you stick precisely to 70 miles an hour? Or do you only stick precisely to 50 miles an hour when you've got those average speed checks that when you're going through when there's roadworks? And if you think about the tax laws, do we only really comply when actually we think there's a chance that we might get caught? And then we've got I put this in as a separate section because I'm a health and safety specialist. Then we've got the Health and Safety Work Act, the management regs, all these different things that we have to comply with in order to do our work. I haven't finished yet. This is other things that you're complying with. If you're employed by a company, there's company procedures. Basically companies are run on very similar lines, but there's variations of the culture and the way that things are done around here. The quality management systems and the environmental management systems, which are based on other standards, which is the ISO standards. And you've got a company ethos and you've got business planning and the cycle that you go around. Compliance with industry practice. We heard yesterday about the Considerate Constructor Scheme and the NHBC warranty standards and other systems that are required by clients. We then get into something that's psychological or social compliance, doing things that we don't really believe in, but we're doing them because we've been asked, somebody's asked us, or there's a group dynamic. You're with a group of people and things are happening. People are doing things that you're not quite comfortable with, but you're going along in the moment. And about bullying and can you do me a favour? How many of you are aware of Milgram's shock study that was carried out in the 1950s and 60s? A few of you here. The little diagram there is about Milgram's shock study, and I'll try and... The E is for, I think it's for encourager. The T is a trainer, and the L is learner. And what this study was, it's really a study of the trainer. And what they did is this, the idea was that the trainer asked some fairly simple questions of the learner, who they couldn't see, they were behind a screen. And every time the learner got the question wrong, the trainer was to administer an electric shock. And the electric shock, and if you can go on YouTube and other things, still see this films of this experiment. The electric shock was a machine that started with 15 volts and went all the way up to 450 volts. Now, in fact, the learner wasn't getting an electric shock. And the encourager was dressed in a white lab coat with a clipboard. And the trainer was encouraged to give the wrong answer. So every now and again, and there'd be a mild ouch from the learner. And obviously, as the electric shock apparently was getting higher and higher, the learner was screaming, please stop. And the trainer would turn to the encourager and say, he's really hurt here. And the encourager was basically said, please carry on. The experiment requires you to carry on. Please continue. And what Milgram was trying to test was this was at the time when there was some of the Nazis were being tried from Nazi Germany. And he wanted to prove that Americans would not go along with being told what to do. Because that was what people were being told. I was only following orders. Milgram found that up to 70% of Americans administered what was clearly a fatal electric shock. They went right up to 450 volts. The learner, once they got to about 300, stopped responding. And they would turn to the encourager and say, he's not saying anything, he's not saying anything. That means he's given a wrong answer. You have to administer the shock. And you think, well, hang on, what is going on here? And what's going on here is you've got somebody who appears to be in authority telling you to do something because I am in authority. And when I was reflecting on this talk last night as I was going through this, I wonder, this is just my thoughts, which I'll share, I may be wrong. I wonder if there was something about this going on with the building regulations. Dame Judith Hackett said that when she spoke to people, an awful lot of people were saying, well, we knew there was something wrong with them. Well, why the hell didn't somebody stop and say, hang on, this is wrong? Because maybe you looked at those regulations, this is an authority that's telling you to do something. Now, I've looked at this and in terms of a health and safety point of view. We've got young people coming into our industry who have been trained and understand about the risks that are faced on our sites. And they come into a design office, and maybe they're looking and saying, should we be doing things slightly differently? And the authority figures, the managers, the directors, are going, no, we can't do that. We haven't got time. The client wouldn't like it. And are those young people going, yeah, okay. And is there an element of they're really doing something that they don't really believe in, but because an authority figure has told them, we're just carrying on and repeating what's done before? Again, these are just my thoughts which I'm sharing with you. Compliance with belief and values, whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you've got a religion or not, so within each of us is a core set of beliefs which drives our values, which drives our behaviours. You know, the religious belief, love your neighbour as yourself, or humanism, living ethical and fulfilling lives without religion, and all those different philosophical theories which I knew when I put them on this slide, and I've forgotten now what they all mean. But they're value-based, they're driving. Values, our beliefs drive our behaviours. Think about people in the war, the conscientious objectors who said, no, I'm going to go to war to be a stretcher bearer, but I'm not going to bear arms against another. These deeper beliefs that are controlling our behaviours. So having got to this point and thought about all this stuff that we comply with, whether consciously or subconsciously, I maybe ask, well, what does less than compliance look like as a starting point? And it's probably breaking the law. It's breaching contract. It's if you've been audited, it's non-conformity reports. It's being disciplined. Maybe it's shame and guilt and loss of face. And it made me realise that actually all of this is balancing conflicting requirements. You might have a law that says one thing and your ethics says something else. So it made me question, where would more than compliance, where can you go beyond this compliance? Is it around social norms? Is it science and technology? Is it contract law? Where can you take the opportunities to go beyond and do more than compliance? So I concluded at this point that I believe that more than compliance can only start from a position of personal beliefs and values. We follow the law because we think the law is the right thing to do. And ethics, just to remind you, these are moral principles that govern our person's behaviour. Do ethics override all other considerations when it comes to compliance? Some social norms. We talked about social norms driving behaviour. But what if the social norm is just plain wrong? Or it's just inhuman? And somebody complying with personal ethics to drive change. And there was changes in women's rights, changes in gay liberation, changes in racial equality. Who was the first person? Think about women's rights. Women were treated in a particular way. Who was the first person to go, this is wrong. I'm not going to accept this anymore, and I'm prepared to step out and speak out so that there is change. And by stepping out and speaking out, others went, actually, we agree, that's wrong. And it became a social movement. Some of them were criminalized, but ultimately, things changed. And when you think about law dictating behavior, but what if the law is unfair or unjust? And here are some lawbreakers: Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. All people now that we will hold up as heroes, as role models. But when they were first doing what they were doing, they were lawbreakers. And they were convicted. This is Martin Luther King. He was arrested in Alabama. So here, compliance with ethics means breaking the law. Health and safety law. Dame Judith Hackett said yesterday about law, it's not just what's written down, but directing the desired behaviours. Health and safety law is not just something to aspire to, it's setting a minimum standard. So here, asking the questions, why do we do things this way, allows for new thinking and new solutions. So here, compliance with ethics doesn't mean breaking the law. Here, compliance with ethics means doing more than the law requires. And let me give you a case study. You've spoken about building mental health in your introduction. Thank you. It was, what is going on at the moment in our society and in our industry. And the mental health provision in construction at the moment, I believe, is going beyond social norms, health and safety law, industry practice, and company practice. And this started, I believe, with a few people's personal beliefs and values. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily one man, but this certainly the leadership that has been given by Martin Coyd, who currently works for Mace. I mean, his personal journey started with a story. His sport is rugby league, and one of the stars, the Great Britain star, Terry Newton, took his own life. And that was a shock to that sport, because here was a sport where you trained people. You knew how fast they should be covering 40 metres. If you forgive me, they were trained to know what colour their pee should be so that they know how hydrated they were. And here was somebody who they missed, who took his own life. So Martin was asked by the sport to look into that. And as he did so, he realised that this applied equally to construction. There was a report last year in 17th of March 2017 from the Office of National Statistics that showed that males in low-skilled occupation had 44% higher rate of suicide than males of the average rate. It then looked specifically at construction. Construction workers have 3 times the national average of suicide. Why is that? Just think for a moment how we treat our construction workers. We had a talk yesterday about modular building, about how nice it was for people to be able to go on their cycles to their workplace. Just think about our construction sites and what we do to our workers, and then think what might be driving them to despair so much that they take their own life. Some symptoms of poor mental health: low productivity, low morale, poor timekeeping, taking risk where somebody hadn't taken risks before, absenteeism, or even worse, presenteeism, staying at work when actually people never question. Martin tells a story of they'd introduced drugs and alcohol testing. And when you find that there's a site that's got a problem, you don't just test one person, you test everybody on the site. And one site manager who was last to be tested threw himself on the floor and said, "If you test me, I will take my own life." And fortunately, they were tuned in to understanding what's going on. And they said, "Okay, what's going on here?" Nobody had noticed that this person had been first on the site. 5:30 was commonly the time he was getting there. And he was last on the site. Whenever there was Saturday work, he was volunteering to come in on Saturdays. Why? His relationships had broken down, his partner had left and taken all the children. His life, forgive the expression, was shit. And the only day he couldn't get through was Sundays. So he took recreational drugs on a Sunday to get him through the day. Martin says that when he was with Skanska, he introduced a drugs and alcohol policy that used to be when you were found to have drugs and alcohol, you were instantly taken off the site, instantly sacked. Not anymore. He says, do I think people want to have a party on my sites? No. They're doing it, potentially they're doing it for other reasons. Men are really good at self-medicating, both with recreational drugs and with alcohol. Lack of cooperation, being tired all the time, unexplained aches and pains, quiet extremes of emotions. I gave a very similar talk to a group of senior managers, and at the end of it, they were weeping, not because of my talk, because they looked at some of these symptoms and they were recognizing these within themselves. Statistically, 1 in 6 of us at any one time are suffering with a mental health problem. I don't know how many people are in this room, but it's certainly more than 60. So there's at least 10 people in this room who are currently suffering. That is a concern. Simple ways of looking after yourself. I thought I should put this in about giving. Kindness goes a long way. Keeping active, keep learning, take notice, connect. There are ways to make things better for yourselves. So building mental health, I could go on and give a completely different talk, but I won't do that. Just there's a www.buildingmentalhealth.net. And there's a charter there about reducing stigma, about appointing champions. There's a completely free toolbox talk that you can download to help reduce stigma and other things as well, guidelines to help you. So if that's something that's of interest to you, you can either come to me later and talk about that. More than compliance, acts of self-giving. Where do you see injustice? It's now coming, where are you? Where do you apply your ethics? And what difference are you going to make? There's a 4,000-year-old Egyptian fable which concluded, that which you hate to be done to you, do not do to others. And there's a 3,500-year-old from the Old Testament, love your neighbour as yourself. But do you really like yourself? If you think about only do to others what you do to yourself, if you've got self-loathing or you're self-harming, well, that's not a particularly high calling, is it? There needs to be a proper understanding that actually in order to help others, this thing about on the airplane, they said, when the masks come down, fit your own mask first. Before you can really help others, you've got to just, for a moment, take a little bit of care of yourself. More than compliance, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. Mahatma Gandhi, he used to hold surgeries in his little house, and hundreds of people would come to him asking for advice. And a woman came one day, she'd queued up for hours with the hundreds of other people with her small son. And she got to the front of the queue and she said, Mahatma, please, would you talk to my son and ask him not to eat so many sweets, not to be abusing sugar like he is. And Mahatma said, I will do that, but please come back in 2 weeks. So she left. She came back 2 weeks later. She queued up with the hundreds of other people. She came to the front of the queue. She asked the same question again. And Mahatma Gandhi turned to the son and talked to him about him eating his sweets. And the son pledged, because Mahatma had spoken to him in this way, I will do something about this. And before she left, she turned to him and said, Mahatma, why? I came 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you speak to him 2 weeks ago? And he turned and said, because 2 weeks ago, I also was addicted to sweets and sugar. I've taken the last 2 weeks to stop doing that. And I can only talk to your son from a position of living that out myself. Where can you, from your position of ethics, from what you believe is right, where can you start to influence your own company procedures or your own company ethics? There are companies, and we're talking around the tables yesterday, we were talking about Carillion. Carillion had 90-day payment terms. and often, very deliberately, didn't even pay after 90 days. We know that the system is broke. Graham Watts was talking yesterday about the system's broke. And sometimes companies are holding on to money because actually they can do that. The construction industry helpline, which is, again, part of building mental health, they run a helpline which is like an EAP program for the whole industry. And people were phoning up saying, I've got real problems with getting paid. You know, the company's holding back. What can I do? What's the legal advice you can give me? And what they were finding over the last few years is that at the end of the call, people were saying, and do you know what? I don't know how I'm going to get through the day. And holding back payment unfairly is not just a nice financial trick. It's potentially putting other people's lives at risk, other people's companies at risk. I don't know the figure, but there were so many small companies that went under once Carillion stopped trading, just because of the money that was unfairly owed to them. I'm really interested that I took some time to go through CABE's, CABE's website and some of the conversations you're having and some of the memorandums of understanding. There's something going on within your association. The fact that you've asked me to talk about this subject here this morning as a keynote speech means that you are caring about this. Means that this is important to you. And how are you going to engage with this process as members of this association to help form what you want to stand for? And because potentially you have the ability not just to influence your own association, you have the ability to influence the whole of the industry by being distinctive and by being different, because we believe that this is the way that we should do business with each other and with different companies. And if you feel fired up about that, join in. Start to voice what you think your association should stand for and how you should be. You'll be pleased to know I'm coming near to the end. How much of what I said rings true? Is it 50%? Is it 10%? But if there's something that rings true in what I said, what are you now going to do about it? How aligned are your personal ethics with that of the industry? I am so proud to have worked for 40 years in this industry. It's given me a fantastic career. And I would encourage people to come into our industry, but I know it's not as we would want it to be. Is it the same for you? If so, what are you going to do about it? What laws and industry practice are just unjust? And where are you going to stand up individually? You can only start, it can only start just as we had, was it Rosa Parks who sat down on a bus and decided she wasn't going to move? And that started a revolution. Are you prepared to sit down on that bus and make a difference for what you really believe in? This is a slide I started at the beginning. I said, who am I? None of you stood up and said, no, that isn't who you are, Kevin. That's what you do. This is who I am. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. Because if you understand who I am and what I believe in, you'll understand what drives me. This is my grandchildren, Isaac and Ben, who I am enormously proud of. And have a great joy that they live within a mile of me and I see them all the time. Why is that important? Why would that direct my behaviour at work? When I was much younger and I worked for a company that had opportunities for sending people overseas. And I think that's fantastic that our industry has these opportunities. I was a family man. I am a family man. I decided that I wasn't going to ask for those opportunities. Yes, you might say that directed my career, but actually it made me who I am. What do I believe in? I believe in justice, mercy, tolerance, forgiveness, being accountable, being available, being vulnerable. If you understand that that is who I am, you'll understand why I get excited about various things. You'll understand why I'm passionate about trying to do something for the miserable conditions that some of our construction workers are facing, because that is who I am. And the question is, who are you? Thank you.